A vampire and Dampier lay at the heart of a frigid winter's tale. A vengeful spirit haunts a notorious prison, and a killer possessing superhuman strength stalks the streets of Prague. You'll find those three adventures and much more inside Vaesen, Mythic Carpathia from Free League Publishing. And I'll share my review right after this. Happy New Year, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Before I dive into today's review, I do want to remind you, if you enjoy the Gaming Gang and would like to support the outlet, you can do so in a few ways. First, by utilizing our affiliate links to the One Bookshelf sites, such as DriveThruRPG, and to do so, simply visit thegaminggang.com, click on one of our banners. That way, if you happen to make a purchase, I get a small portion of that sale. You can also make a one-time donation by way of PayPal or become a monthly member of our Patreon. You'll find links in the show notes. Also, down in those show notes, you're going to find an invite link to our Discord server. Absolutely free to sign up. So be sure to hang with the gang over on Discord. The Gaming Gang 12 Days of Reviews continues, as today I'll be sharing my thoughts about Vaesen Mythic Carpathia from Free League Publishing. This 136-page hardcover with PDF carries an MSRP of $49.99. If you want to grab just the PDF alone, you can do so over at DriveThruRPG for $21.99. Having said all that, let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I've got Mythic Carpathia for Vaesen. Three things I want to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Free League Publishing were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it's very important you know that. We're also not going to be looking at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a really good feel for what you're going to find inside. And then lastly, if you're a player and maybe your game master has picked up Mythic Carpathia, maybe they just haven't started running it yet, maybe they're planning on picking this up, there are going to be some spoilers. They will be light spoilers. I'm not going to get into too much detail about the adventures as well as the bestiary entries here. Now, of course, if your game master has been kicking around picking up Mythic Carpathia, let them know about this video. That way they can approach this and make a far more informed buying decision. All right, first thing we're going to do is take a peek at the credits page. A lot of folks worked very hard to bring this to life, so let's give credit where credit is due. Vaesen is based upon the book The Undead by Johan Egerkrans, and you'll see a good amount of his artwork throughout, including the cover art. I will mention that we have seen a lot of the Johan Egerkrans artwork in prior Vaesen releases, but we will have a lot of new artwork in here from Anton. It's either Vitus or Vitus. I apologize for mispronouncing the name. Some of these we have seen in the past. All right, so let's talk about production quality. Already mentioned the artwork, which is fantastic. Don't get me wrong. It's just some of it's recycled from prior Vaesen releases. Paper stock, excellent. Really nice. Free League Publishing has some of the best paper stock out there. And of course, it's got a matte finish. Fairly matte finish, because I know there are quite a few folks out there who just don't care for that really shiny finish that some role-playing game books have. I'll be honest. I mean, sometimes it causes trouble when I'm shooting video of those as well. But very, very well done. This, of course, has stitched binding. I want to say this is printed in Lithuania. I know some of the European printers just really do some spectacular work. All right. So we also get a fold out map of Carpathia because the focus of Mythic Carpathia, of course, are the Baltic nations there. And then we get a fold out of Prague. So there you have that. And nice thick paper stock on the map there, the poster map. We're going to start off Mythic Carpathia with a discussion of the area. We've got the different regions. We have major cities, of course, Krakow, Prague. Those are pretty much Budapest are your major cities at this point in time. If you're not overly familiar with Vaesen, it is a horror role-playing game. It is investigative. Some people have asked me in the past, well, what's really the difference between Vaesen and Call of Cthulhu? And of course, the biggest is going to be this is not the Cthulhu mythos. This is based upon legends and myth from Europe, especially Sweden, of course, seeing its Free League publishing. But the approach is also far lighter mechanically than you would find in Call of Cthulhu. Now, I love Call of Cthulhu, don't get me wrong. I've been running it for more than 4 decades. But still, this is a completely different sort of game. It's got a different attitude than Call of Cthulhu because the player characters in Vaesen belong to a society that investigates unusual goings on. And the Vaesen themselves are not always going to be evil. Sometimes they're misunderstood. Maybe they feel they've been wronged. Or maybe they're just looking to kill everybody they can get their hands on. I mean, that's a possibility as well. So the first section is going to get into the region itself, and then we'll also jump into Pravda, which is this Baltic society that investigates weird goings on and things like that. So if you want the player characters to belong to that group, you certainly can set that up. Now, I will mention, as far as being like a Gazetteer of Europe at this time, and speaking of time, there is really no set period for Vaesen. It's mid 19th century to early 20th century. So I would probably say, for the most part, you're going to get the best mileage out of a period from about 1890 up through the beginning of the Great War, so 1914. But as far as a gazetteer and a history book, it's all just pretty small nuggets. So keep in mind, this is not going to be some deep Trieste into the Baltic states prior to World War I. No, not at all. And while we do get some historical information, that historical information is kind of a conglomeration of that period of time. So that's why I wanted to mention there is no set time that Vaesen takes place, which also frees up the game master to create their own Mythic Europe. I should also point out that these entries for the various different cities and things about the region and the cultures are not going to be very in-depth. I know I've seen some critics of like Mythic Britain mention that, they could get the same information from a quick glance at Wikipedia. And I understand that. They're not wrong, but still, I think the Gazetteer portion of these mythic books for Vaesen really aren't designed to be the end-all, be-all as far as laying out a setting for you. They're supposed to be able to give the game master more of a feel and to help get their creative juices flowing as far as that area and what's going on. We also have a Bestiary section. So we've got 16 new Vaesen included. So we get their stat blocks, we get information about them, examples of conflicts, because every adventure is going to have some sort of a conflict. And what's meant by that is opposing factions, opposing individuals, opposing groups who not necessarily are battling each other, but they are at loggerheads. They are butting heads. And that's what they mean by conflict in Vaesen. So very cool new Vaesen in the book, including Baba Yaga. We also have the Vampire and the Damphir. And we have a new occupation. It is the Vampire Hunter, or as I like to say, Vampire Hunter. Then we're going to dive into our 3 adventures. And in my opinion, the big selling point of Mythic Carpathia is going to be these 3 adventures. Honestly, the trio of tales inside this book boosted up the review score about 2 points. And I'll talk about that when I get into a discussion of some final thoughts and give Mythic Carpathia a review score. So we've got a trio of adventures. The first involves a vampire and his Damphir daughter, and it takes place in the heart of winter in this small Baltic village. And it is a really well-constructed adventure. I would say if I were the GM, I would really do my best to kind of try to channel John Carpenter's The Thing in certain ways, because this is supposed to be a very harsh winter that's taking place, and the player characters are trapped in this village. And of course, they have a vampire and his daughter to deal with. Next up, we've got The Gathering Storm. And I think The Gathering Storm is a great example of how Vaesen adventures tend to skew differently than many other horror role-playing games. Because as I had mentioned, these supernatural beings, these Vaesen, they're not necessarily always evil. They could be a wronged spirit. They could be trolls who, aren't being treated the way they would like to be by the local inhabitants. Maybe they feel that they're being taken for granted. There are all these different Vaesen, and all the different Vaesen will have their own motivations, which bring about these conflicts in these adventures. So this is a story about a notorious prison that's being haunted by a vengeful spirit. And of course, there's more to the story than meets the eye. Now, the spirit is supposedly a nun who committed suicide in the prison, because there was also a monastery that's part of this as well. And like I said, there's a little bit more to the story than just that. So really, really interesting. This is an adventure that's really not going to include much, if any, combat, which is fine. That's something else about Vaesen adventures. You don't tend to have a ton of combat taking place. That doesn't mean that there isn't tension and this is not a spooky game. It's just that usually the player characters aren't all whipping out pistols and opening fire, because the reality is these supernatural creatures aren't affected by normal weapons for the most part. Then the final adventure, The Secret of the Maharal, is very interesting. This takes place in Prague, and this adventure is the culmination of a conflict which begins 250 years prior to the adventure. Something I like about this is it does draw from the history of Prague. I think one of the highlights of this adventure is the historical aspects of this, because for the most part, I would probably recommend sticking to like the last decade of the 19th century as far as your Vaesen setting, because that is a really, really interesting period in European history. If you want to learn more about it, you should probably check out The Proud Tower from Barbara W. Talkman. Excellent book. Now, granted, it didn't win a Pulitzer Prize like The Guns of August, but still, excellent book. And this draws upon the anti-Semitism of Prague during this period, because you had various different groups. Prague was a pretty open city. And of course, that brought about religious conflict from the various different citizens. So, like this a lot. We'll wrap up. We got some handouts for our players. And of course, once again, we've got our poster maps. That is a peek inside Vaesen, Mythic Carpathia from Free League Publishing. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. So let's break this down by section. But first, production quality. Excellent. It's what we expect from Free League Publishing. It really is. And weirdly enough, I think sometimes I have the impression that Free League Publishing likes to pull out all of the stops for its Vaesen releases as far as the paper stock and just how well this book is going to hold up at your game table. Very, very nice. So as far as the first portion of the book, which is kind of a gazetteer, it's about the Baltic area, like Transylvania, the area that's now like the Czech Republic. I think some of the critics out there who talk about the Mythic books, like Mythic Britain, being, about as useful as a glance through Wikipedia, I can't argue with them. There's not a lot of depth to these entries, but I honestly don't think a game master really needs that anyway. We're not trying to simulate the exact history of what's going on during whatever period you happen to drop your campaign or one-shot adventures into. So I don't ding Free League Publishing and the authors all that much for the Gazetteer, but I will say that the Gazetteer itself is certainly not something that moves the needle as far as picking this book up. What starts to move the needle are the 16 new Vaesen, all very interesting. I also enjoy how when we get a stat block presented for the Vaesen, for one, they're super short as far as the actual mechanical aspects of the Vaesen. But I love how we get background about these creatures. What are some of their motivations? What are some of the possible conflicts that could come up between them and basically us? So I like that quite a lot. And we've got some interesting new entries there as well. Plus, we get the Vampire Hunter as a new career, and pretty cool career. And I would say in that first adventure, you might want to have one of your player characters, the Vampire or Vampire Hunter. It is the adventures that I feel are really the standouts for Mythic Carpathia. A trio of really good, very solid multi-session adventures. Now, I'm not saying you're going to be able to put together an entire campaign based on one of the three tales, but they are not the sort of adventure that your players are going to rock on through in 3 or 4 hours. I definitely appreciate that. Now, of course, these adventures never wear out their welcome either. There's a lot of good investigation. There's a lot of spooky things going on. Another aspect that I like about the Vaesen adventures, things don't normally turn out to be what they look like at first glance. That's kind of a common theme that runs through Vaesen adventures. I do recommend Vaesen. I think it's a really well done book. I'll have to say, prior to the adventures, it would have gotten a ho-hum recommendation, mainly based on the Bestiary. But I like the 3 adventures so much On a scale of 0 to 10, I give Mythic Carpathia or Vaesen an 8.5 out of 10. Love the adventures. The Gazetteer portion is an interesting read, at least. Of course, I like the Bestiary also. All right. That is it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Should mention, I'm on a bit of a holiday break, so I will not return with a live stream until January 6th. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Happy New Year to you all. And until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.